Hey guys, it's Dr. Goldberg. We're going to talk today a little bit about choosing a form of business ownership. I know that many of you probably are um, looking at going into your own business as a career option. So there's a couple things that you need to be aware of. I'm not going to go into the learning objectives, although I expect you to go through them yourself. Um, the simplest form of business ownership is a sole proprietorship. Sole proprietorship means that one individual owns a business and he or she is responsible for all aspects of that business. Most businesses that we see that are large today often started as a sole proprietorship. It's the most popular form of business ownership. So anytime you decide that, hey, I want to start becoming a personal trainer, I've always liked working out, I'm going to be a personal trainer, you can start your own sole proprietorship doing that. And so, for example, in my consulting practice, that's a sole proprietorship. And in talking about some of the advantages and disadvantages, it's easy to start up. You pretty much just hang a shingle on your door and say, I'm now in business. It gives you the pride of owning your own business, which is always nice. All the profits that the business earns get retained by you, so you're not taxed in any special sort of way. And you have the flexibility of being your own boss. The downside or disadvantage is that there's unlimited liability. What that means is in a typical business situation, if you had a corporation, for example, and a lawsuit happens, the lawsuit sues the corporation. It does not sue you as an individual owner, typically. So in the case of a sole proprietorship, you are the business. So if the business gets sued, that goes on you to pay off whatever damages may be incurred by who's ever suing you. And that's enough. That distinction is not trivial. There's also lack of continuity. So if you decide you want to go on vacation, then your business kind of ceases to operate for a little while. There's also lack of money. Obviously, as an individual, you don't always have access to funds to improve your business, offer new products, etc. And any individual is limited by his or her own management skills. So although hopefully from taking this course, they'll improve, the reality is one individual is limited in what he or she can do. I know from my own experience in my consulting practice, I tend to be really bad about remembering to bill people. And it's only when I realize, hey, so-and-so hasn't paid me, that it occurs to me that I never billed them. So when I talk about management skills, it's not just the knowledge, it's also realizing that you have to be your accounts payable, accounts receivable, the person providing the goods and services and so forth. So it's a lot to swing. And finally is difficulty in hiring employees, because as a sole proprietor, you don't have sort of name recognition, and a lot of potential employees might not trust that you have the ability to pay them what they expect to be paid. The next form of business that we'll talk about is partnerships, and partnerships are a voluntary association of two or more people that act as co-owners. It's very, very similar to a sole proprietorship, except that there are multiple owners instead of just one. It's considerably less common than sole proprietorships or than corporations, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And there's no legal limit on the number of partners that can exist within a partnership, but there is a minimum. The minimum is that there needs to be at least two. And usually the idea is to pool special talents. So you see it a lot in law firms, for example. So you may have one attorney who specializes in employment law, another attorney who specializes in finance, laws regarding finance, and they decide to pool their talents together so that they can have a bigger client base. Partners are generally of one of two varieties. A general partner is pretty much what you've probably imagined as I've been talking about it. Someone who takes a share in responsibility for operating the business. A limited partner, on the other hand, doesn't really get involved in the day-to-day operations of the business itself, but contributes money or other capital to the business. So they don't. That's kind of their role, is to be the deep pockets in the business. Um, when you arrange a partnership, there's usually an agreement called an Articles of Partnership that's created, and that sort of spells out legally who's responsible for what each partner's responsibilities will be, how much each partner is going to invest in the business, how profits or loss are divided among the partners, etc. And the advantages and disadvantages that I talked about with regard to sole proprietorships are pretty much identical to those with regard to partnerships. Um, the business gets to retain the profits, although you have to now share it with other people. And you get a little bit of a combined business skill and knowledge by having other people involved that may have different skills and knowledge bases. The downside is you still have unlimited liability, which means that if your business gets sued, you and your partner or partners are financially responsible for that, which is potentially a huge risk. And then you also have the added bonus of potential disagreements. And oftentimes this occurs whether you feel like you have a good relationship with a person before you're in business. Sometimes things emerge when you're in business with somebody that may not be obvious before you're engaged in business with them. So it's good to make sure you're in it for the long haul and that you can get along and know how to resolve disagreements. Corporations are different than the first two forms of business that we talked about in that it is its own entity. So if I started a corporation, there would be Karen Goldberg as well as Karen Goldberg Corp, if you will, which means that my business would be taxed separately from my taxes, and it would also mean that if my business gets sued, it's only my business that gets sued. They can't come after my house or wages or anything like that. So it's an artificial person or an artificial entity, I think is probably a better description, that has a lot of the same legal rights as a regular person, but it really exists only on paper. So I can be a corporation if I wanted to. I don't need a separate physical space to be a corporation. Currently, about 19% of all businesses are corporations. So when we talk about ownership in a corporation, it works a lot differently than it does in a sole proprietorship or a partnership. One of the primary differences is there are shares of stock. And shares of stock are portions of ownership of an organization. So when we think about trading on the stock market, when you own a share of stock in Apple, say, for example, that means that you are a part owner of Apple. It's probably going to be a very small part, and you're not going to be able to be a huge influencer in the corporation, but you do get voting rights, which is how you maintain influence as a stock owner or a stockholder. Corporate ownership can either be closed or open. In a closed corporation, the stock is divided among a very limited number of people. It could be people that are known by the person who's creating the corporation or the people who are creating the corporation. And it's not publicly traded. So if you think typically that would be more common in the case of a closed of a smaller business. An open corporation is a corporation where the stocks are bought and sold on the stock market. So you've probably heard the term, or you may have heard the term, initial public offering or IPO. When an organization decides to make an initial public offering, basically what they're doing is moving from a closed corporation where there's a much tighter, limited group of people that own shares of stock to an open corporation where anybody can just go to E-Trade or Schwab Online or whatever service and purchase shares of stock in the company. To form a corporation, you go through a process. Usually you want to consult with an attorney and you come up with what's called an Articles of Corporation. And, whoops, here we go. I skipped one. An Articles of Incorporation or corporate charter. And that's kind of a contract that basically says who is party to the corporation, their names and addresses, what the purpose of the corporation is, how much you plan on valuing stock at, and that's if you're in a closed corporation, that's really relatively trivial, but in a openly traded or an open corporation, that's a big deal, and you'll want to have financial advisors come in and evaluate how much it should be. Also, the rights and privileges of the stockholders. Moving back for just a second, I did want to mention where to incorporate. Different states have different tax laws that make some states more or less attractive than others. So, for example, Delaware, despite it being a very small state, one of the smallest states in the country, is home to the largest number of corporations because their tax laws are much more warm to businesses than other states. So a domestic corporation would be if you're incorporated in the state where, if you're actually located in the state where the business is incorporated. Foreign, in this context, when we say a foreign corporation, we're still talking within the United States, although it says foreign, it's a little confusing. We're still talking within the United States, but it's in a different state than where the physical business exists. Alien is the term that we use for corporations that are chartered by foreign governments. Okay, so moving ahead. Whoops, not too far ahead. When we talk about forming a corporation and this notion of stock, there are different types of stock that can be offered. Usually the two general varieties are common stock and preferred stock. Common stock, people who own common stock are given voting rights. So if you have even one share of stock in Apple, you have the right to vote. And one of the most important things that you typically vote on is board of directors, which I'll get to in a moment. Preferred stock, usually owners do not have voting rights, but if dividends are paid, not every corporation pays dividends on their stocks, so that's something to look into if you're looking to get into the stock market. Where dividends are paid, preferred stock owners get paid dividends before common stockholders do. The board of directors, which I'd alluded to before, is the top governing body of the corporation. The members are elected by stockholders, so that's one of the biggest roles that you have as an owner of stock in a large corporation. The board of directors is responsible for setting the goals of the corporation and creating strategic plans. And they can be either inside or outside. Inside is just people within the organization, usually the CEO. Chief Executive Officer is on the board of directors, could be the chairperson of the organization, etc. But it's usually people inside. Outside directors, usually for larger organizations, the board of directors will be comprised of people that work in other businesses, not the specific corporation. So you may have a board of directors that has individuals from that are on a board of directors from Home Depot, that are from Bank of America, from Remax Real Estate, so on and so forth. The idea being you want individuals with a wide array of talents to help set your organization's goals. So moving to the advantages and disadvantages of corporations, which is where I'm going to end because I only have 50 seconds. You have this limited liability I alluded to before, so that means that if the corporation gets sued, it's only the corporation's money that gets paid, not the individual owner's money. It's a lot easier to raise capital through the purchase of stock. Transferring ownership is easy. Basically, you trade stock on the stock market, and that's how ownership is transferred. It lives on in perpetuity, so if the owner dies or the founder dies, the corporation continues to exist because it's its own entity. And you get a wider variety of management specialties. On the downside, it's a lot more complicated to form, and you have the double taxation because you still pay taxes as an individual. That's where I'm going to end.